standing up. I don't know whether that can do it or operate. What?
Got the squealer.
Louder, can y'all hear?
I've got it on full blast right now. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm going to try to stand up so I can look at you while I'm talking. And that may not work. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Aaron knows one thing, Mike knows one thing, Joe Help knows one thing, I know one thing. So we finally agreed I would write the script, make copies for everybody so we could adhere to the same basic stories as we go around. I've done quite a bit of research and have some more stuff to add to what I've written. So we may have a little variance, but not much. The one thing we've got to do now is quit looking at these structures we can see and look at the past as what was there 100 years ago. And that's kind of hard to do. And my job is to try to describe that so you can envision it. And I don't know whether we're going to succeed or not, but we will try. There are a couple of things that are unique about Fairview. The one key one that I dwell on so much is the railroad and the effect it had on the development of Fairview. And so we're going to start with the railroad and then we'll end with the railroad. There aren't many towns like Fairview that still exist in the shape that they do after the railroad has already pulled out. There are two things that you can attribute to our present success, if you would consider it a success. And that's our county seat, headquarters, and our school system. Now, we've had the good fortune to have some industry here and some of the families, and we'll talk about that later. You go on out.
All the way up?
Yeah.
I have three here.
Go on out.
You know, getting over here.
Go like you're going to the railroad end.
Got it.
And see, I've already forgotten what I was going to say. This may be the end of the tour right here.
You were talking about Fairview, the railroad, and how we are still
The
existing.
county seat, it does the county seat.
I see the Griswolds are here.
They are.
Well, the first item I'm going to point out is the railroad depot, the building that has the artificial roof on it that is not part of the original building. But when they built this, it only cost $5,600. And the railroad depot was located downtown, and we'll go by the location. But we had a benefit in the 70s, some of you may have been to it, and we raised enough money to move it out here. It's one of the few depots on the railroad that has been captured. This railroad is the Kansas City, Mexico and Orient Railroad that was founded by Arthur Stillwell in 1900. He had founded the Kansas City Southern Railroad that went from Kansas City, Missouri to the Gulf of Mexico. If you ever go down in South Texas, you'll hear of the town of Port Arthur. It was named after Arthur Stillwell. He developed that town. One of his features was when he laid out a railroad, he liked to have the towns build the towns himself because he could control the market that way. So one of the things that we wanted to do was start with the fact of the railroad being such a powerful influence on Fairview. The engine is another thing, and it's a pride and joy. It still has the bell on it. Few of the engines lost their bells. People took them off. This is 2522, which was the number that the Santa Fe Railroad put on it in 1928 when they bought out the Kansas City, Mexico and Orient Railroad. The Kansas City, Mexico and Orient Railroad was designed to go from Kansas City southwesterly to Mexico and the Pacific side. And there's a town down there by the name of Tapalabonco, and it now encases a port known as Port Stillwell. And Arthur said, if I can build that railroad to the Pacific Ocean, we can set up a port that can take care of ships that come and bring products from the Orient and bring them to the Midwest. 2522 is a 280. A 280. There is no other 280 around that I can find anywhere. This was a fleet of engines which Arthur Stillwell bought from the New York Central Railroad, where his grandfather owned a block of stock. And it was bought around 1910, but it was numbered 66. And if you Google it, Aaron Googled it, and he found engine 66 on his computer. And that's what the Orient numbered it. And after they sold out to the Santa Fe, they numbered it 2522. The numbers 280 are the wheels. 2 little wheels in front, 8 big wheels in the middle, 0 wheels at the back. There are some that are 282s. This engine that was built for New York Central was a very efficient engine, and it served very well for the Orient and the Santa Fe until the Santa Fe went out of, closed this line down. The white building, they call it the Bluefront Hotel. There is some mystique about this building. It was located on the lot downtown that we'll go by, in which hoofleggers ran the boarding house there, and at that time it was referred to as the Bluefront Hotel. So when it was closed and we moved it, we referred to it as the Bluefront Hotel. There is a picture in the museum, and it says Bluefront Hotel, and it does not look like this building. Another interesting factor about it is D.W. Steckel put the hotel in, and when he did in 1909, he borrowed $300 from the Long Bell Lumber Company. When he sold the hotel, he sold it for $3,500. Did he build that building for $300? There is nothing in the paper about that. And during these years, and we're talking primarily after statehood, 07, 08, 09, and 010, that is my emphasis. At that time, there was a need for hotel rooms, and there was a lot of building going on. And the Republican was following all of this, and the publisher was very good about giving information, and there was nothing about the building of the Bluefront Hotel. But there was in the Clio Chieftain, because the Bluefront Hotel was one of the key hotels in Clio. And I followed it up until 1909, and then the Chieftain quit talking about it. And I said, okay, it's obvious. We bought the Bluefront Hotel and moved it to Fairview. The only problem I've got about that is how in the world did they get it across the Cimarron River? Let's go on.
Was this engine part of the
Steam engine, and as they crossed the Cimarron River, he pointed to the Gloss Mountains and told the engineer to slow down. All of these people went back then, and he had chairs. He set up chairs on a flat car, brought out champagne and cigars, and the train moved very slowly as he told them the story about the minerals in the Glos Mountains and all of the resources in this country. And those people shelled out their money. Here, where are you going?
Well, I thought you meant Jay Bartell's over there.
No. I'm sure you remember George Eubanks and his wife Esther. Esther was a Cunningham. She wrote this story. Yeah, now pull out on the grass over there.
That's where the bus was, while the bus, the other bus.
Her daddy was Hugh Cunningham. He ran the Fairview Republican for a number of years. He was a school teacher, but he was not the educator of the family. The educator of the family was Will Cunningham. Will came in the road of 1893, and he settled on this quarter section over here to the west. He built a sod house right here where the embankment is cut out, the cut right in this corner. And Esther wrote, no, I'm sorry, it was Mary Lowell Randall wrote in volume 1 of the history book that this sod house was 40 foot long. There was a family by the name of Firebaugh here, and the daughter was Aura. They were in an insurance business. She wrote a lot of papers. We bought their house. I found the papers in the basement. And in there was a letter, and she wrote about the school. She said this sod house was 50 foot long. 50 foot long. A sod house made with dirt, just like you're seeing here, that was cut up with grass on it and stacked one on top of the other. And we have a picture of it in the history books of the sod building that was called the schoolhouse and the First Methodist Church. Will Cunningham built that building right there, and he was a single man. And I don't believe he built a 40-foot sod house for a single man. But in any event, he was very interested. Now we're talking about the run of September of '93 and May of '94. The school district of '84, Fairview area, was organized. 8 months, and Will Cunningham was the one that pushed for it. John Floyd was the other man that pushed for it to get the school. And so the District 84 was created May of 1894, and he donated the sod house for the school building. Now, there is always going to be controversy in stories about things that happen. People get things secondhand, or they read something wrong. I have done it several times. The story that was in the history book about Will Cunningham was written by his daughter-in-law after the fact. Much of the story is about herself, but she said that her husband Keith was born in that sod house. I find it questionable because Will did not get married until 1901, and Keith was born in 1902. If you count up 1894 to 1902, the sod house would have been in pretty sorry shape by the time he was born. I don't believe that happened. But in any event, it served as our school. And the question comes up, why would Fairview put a school right here? The reason is very clear. There were 25 children in that first class. And in that group, there were 3 from what we call the town of Fairview. Charlie Floyd, Bertie Montague, and Floyd Montague. Montagues had a grocery store. Now, in 1994, that's about all the people there were in Fairview. The Bowers family on the west side of Main Street, the Becker family on the south side, the Floyd family on the north side. So we had less than 20 people, and there were only 3 of them. There were only 3 children. The Clifford and Henry Bowers was not married, so he didn't have but a couple of families. The Becker family had their first child, who was the first child born in Fairview. So it must have been a year after that. But what's interesting is, if you look at the enrollment of 1895, the first year that school started, not 94, they couldn't get a teacher here. Hugh Cunningham was still teaching in Delphos, Kansas in 1894. But he gave up the school that year and came to Fairview where his brother was, and he took this school in 1895 and 1896. And the children were these Martins kids that lived up the road. Henry Martins, Dan Martins, Jacob Martins, that's Garen's grandfather and Mike's grandfather, all Peter Martin's kids. Peter was very interested in education, obviously, because he had a house full of kids. The others don't go to school yet. There was also the Buller family that lived right here, and then south of here was the Eck family and Salaskas, and then over here was Kane. And then there's an interesting fact in that this school zone, this school district stops right there at that road. We are not in the Fairview School District as we're here. This is the old Headlight School District. But there were 2 kids from over there that came to this school, Henry Peters and Earl Zimmerman. They both came across the creek to come to this school because it was closer than the Headlight School, which is way up north towards the river. Then there was the Seibel kids that came from over northwest of Fairview, a long distance. But there were 25 kids in that first year of school. I went up to the Woods County records at the courthouse up there and worked till I got all that information. That's a rare amount of data to hang on to. But it bears out the fact that we'll put here, take this soddy over here for the school, because all of the little children live over here along the creek, and they could get to the school easier. Well, I have it up in town, but there's only 3 kids, and there wasn't anybody else there anyhow. So that's what they did. Okay, we're ready to go. So
Jim, is it?
I have spent a lot of time on. Huh?
More air.
I can't get more air when we're sitting.
Yeah, probably.
We'll have to open up the tops.
That's something like here.
Jim, that's Martin still farms this and owns this, doesn't he? Trent?
Yeah.
Different Martins, I guess.
Yeah. Can you? And while they were using the soddy for the schoolhouse, Will did build a nice home over on the west side of his quarter, which would be that space north of the seed barn. As we go east west, we'll see the seed barn up there. And Hugh got married shortly. I forget what year he got married. But Will was very active in extension work, development of the conservation work, in addition to the school, and did not serve on the school board. Mr. Martins did. Trip together, so we threw it in our agenda. The Rancho, 1947, Floyd and Beatrice Marshall quit the pool hall business and bought a Quonset hut from the prisoner of war camp in Alva and brought it down here and remodeled it and started having dances. In those olden days, there wasn't much to do but have a church gathering or a school gathering or dances. Many people had dances in their homes. It was still popular then after World War II. The interesting thing about this is there were some real interesting bands that came to Fairview and played at that dance hall. One of them was Johnny Lee Wills, a brother of Bob Wills, and there was Merle Lindsay, who was just on his way up. And after he left here and took his band to the West Coast, he got with CBS, and he was on the Ozark Jubilee for several years. He also recorded songs through MGM Records and was very successful in the music industry in country and western. Another one was Ernie Fields. Ernie was a trumpet and piano player. He had a 16-piece all-black band. Now, black people were not welcome in Fairview after dark for many, many years. But by the 40s and into after World War II, much of that had gone away. Ernie Fields came up here and played, and that's all in the Fairview Republican as advertisement for these bands that played. Of course, I didn't know. Then there was C.C. Davis, who was very, very popular and was here a lot. Clarence Davis, and he settled in Longdale, but he had a band and it was popular. The last band before we start pulling out, and we're ready to go, was the Jazz Pups. The Jazz Pups was a band from Fairview High School that we played on. But we only knew 3 songs. So we had to dance out here and play our 3 songs. Floyd never invited us back. I don't know why. We never came back. Turn 12th Street, go down to Ash, turn right on Ash. Pickle Factory. Mary Speece, and Bob was an undertaker. There we are right here. Mary Speece and Nell Carroll became Mary Nell Pickles. And Mary Speece homestead, her family homesteaded north of Clio along the Eagle Cheek. They had a real nice farm up there. And Bob said, I'll get the cucumbers. So he worked with his tenant up there to raise cucumbers. And Hugh furnished this garage apartment. And they bought big wooden vats and set them in the back. There was 2 big vats, and then they had the kegs inside. Her remembrance of it is, here, she and her brother lived in this second house right there. They used to come over and get into the pickles. And that's what she remembers about it. But Mary Nell Pickles was a brand that was sold on the open market across Oklahoma. Mr. Carroll was in the investment business, and he had several men that went out and called on people for investment in stocks and bonds. Mr. Speece was an undertaker. He had people dealing in caskets. So they got these salesmen all lined up with pickles. And they would sell caskets and pickles, or stocks and bonds and pickles, all around Oklahoma. Now finally the girls, I mean, you're talking the summertime without any air conditioning, those pickle vats, it got pretty hot in there. They played out. The pickle industry played out. It only lasted for a short time, but it's been something that's been remembered. Okay.
And it'll always be the pickle.
And it'll always be the pickle factory, as run down as it's getting to be. Let's go back to State Road, and then we go over to State Road. Or if you wanted to go clear to 6th Street, you could.
Not a clue.
Well, coincidence. But by that time now, you have the report of the railroad coming to Fairview. He organized in 1900. The train hit town in 1903. But in that period in between, there was work being done on the rails. There were people coming to Fairview. There were investors who were interested. Mr. Stillwell had people lined up to help him. One committee formed the town of Fairview in 1901. Until then, it was quarter sections with pasture ground and a few buildings. In 1901, they laid out this town. And when they did, they laid it out in blocks and lots. And so we find of record that when we get to 6th Street,
We are at 6th Street.
we go up to the last block before State Road, which is the 600 block, and at 601 North 6th Street, we find a green stucco bungalow, which was built in 1931, I found out, and is not the original building. But in 1902, we were still not a county, and all of our tax money went to Alva, and we did not have enough money being appropriated to come back down in allocation to the school system, because, right here, the territorial governor said that he would appropriate money for teachers, but you had to build your own school building. And that is why Mr. Cunningham donated to Saudi. That's all he had was to give. John Floyd, meanwhile, has built a hotel, or is building a hotel in '02, and also has a grocery business. And he had a little cash flow. He bought these lots right here and gave them to the school district. So this became our second school for Fairview. Not those nice buildings out there, any of them. This was the school in '02 and '03. Okay.
You didn't tell them about the auditorium here along the way with the cyclone. Remember that one?
Connie wants to tell us about the cyclone at the auditorium. You tell us that while we go on.
It blew
Where
it
we gonna
down.
We're going to go left to the stockyards.
What year was it? I was a little girl, probably 1930.
I'm too old to know anything about your era, dear.
Well, you were here when it went down, weren't you? Daddy and Mother played badminton there until it blew down.
Now we know why the building blew down. Her mom and daddy played badminton in it, and it tore up the gymnasium at the school. Arthur Stillwell did was call on his friend the Willis brothers. And the Willis brothers from Kansas City came to Fairview, and starting in 1902, they went to work on buying lots straight over
Yeah, I
there.
got away. Or I'll go. You're the judge, right?
No, we don't have any cloud now to get their tickets. In fact, they'll give them the fee before they move anybody else. And he always either had somebody else build something, or he did it with somebody else's money. They formed a corporation known as the Orient Cotton Gin Company, and they put in gins in Altus, Clinton, and Fairview. The cotton gin mill was built right here in this parking lot, and we'll turn left at the street. This was the cotton gin. The Willis brothers built an ice plant to the south, which is west of the elevator, and had a state-of-the-art steam engine, and they piped the steam to the cotton gin. Now, when these settlers came to this country, broom corn was the thing to grow. I guess it was because the little machine that they plant, the row crops were easier to plant. But anyhow, broom corn was the thing. But with the coming of the railroad and the idea of other ways of making money, 10,000 acres was put to cotton right at this time. And so the cotton gin operated here, and as we go on down to where this junkyard is, it is on top of where the ice plant was. The ice plant was a state-of-the-art ice plant. I used to work there, so I'm familiar with the characteristics of it. It had a water tower, it had a steam room and a cooling room, and right here, stop. Right out there in the middle, if you could see a white bed of a pickup, and you look further to the east, you see two cement pillars. There's two men. Those two cement pillars were the pillars for the engine that ran both the ice plant and the cotton gin. Your ice was made in a rectangular tin tub from a crane hung down into brine water, which circulated from that engine running a pump. It circulated that brine water to convert the water to ice. And each of those blocks weighed 200 pounds. The crane would pull the ice up. I would roll it over here to right about where that white truck is, right there. And then there's a switch on the wall where you turn the electricity on to make the saw run, and you run that cake through and score it and make 100-pound and 50-pound markers on that, so when you tap it with an ice pick, it will cut into 50 or 100-pound blocks, which was stored in a cooling building over there. We're probably sitting on top of the office building of the ice plant right now. And then, of course, the ice was delivered to the people that had coolers or refrigerators around town, ice boxes. One of the men that delivered was Hardwater Rothenberger, and he got his name from delivered ice. Hardwater. Isn't that clever? And so, that ice plant lasted until in the 40s, and a fire started in the engine room, and the plant was destroyed. After that, we got our ice from the Clinton ice plant, and there's another little ice plant storage building downtown that you may remember. Okay, we can go ahead now. Go up to stoplight, go over down Main.
What do you say?
I haven't had to refer to the notes. They used to bring their watermelons and pay to store them. And White Rock Cafe was here, the only place in town that sold beer. They brought their beer down here and stored it. I never knew till I was almost grown that those little syrup buckets that Daddy brought home from the ice plant was not milk. Those guys would tap those kegs with a nail and let a little beer drain out, then they'd plug that hole up and sneak a little beer out of those White Rock kegs.
Cafe was really
Where are you going?
Oh, do you want to go by Stern's place up here? Do you want to do that?
I wanted to turn there.
I know.
You said the light, so I thought, well, we'll go this.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, I just need your man.
It's in his head.
We can move around.
The growth of Fairview to the extent there were a lot of families with kids living west of the tracks. The school board said, we can't have those kids crossing those railroad tracks to come to this school over here.
Can you get through?
I think so.
You're fine over here.
We'll tell you when to open your eyes.
I don't hear anything. All right, come on up. Stop. Come on up. Right here. Right here. The school board built another school. Grades 1 through 4 living west of the tracks go to school here. We had 2 teachers over here, so they must have split them up like first and second and third and fourth, because we had 2 teachers assigned to this school building for clear up to 1912. So we had a school building on 6th Street and the school building here And then during the course of that, we're building a bigger building. Now, if you want to go around the block, let's go around the block.
Yeah, open the windows hot.
Open those upper windows if you're hot. That'll let air through.
I thought I was making enough wind. You didn't need the windows open.
Yeah,
Hot,
but it's
got
hot.
left or right.
It's hot.
A lot of hot air, Jim.
All right.
Oh, we all got that one.
Let's go up to Elm Street and then go across. I gotta catch still Main Street. On the left is the place where there was a second cotton gin. The street did not go all the way through. There was no street through here. But there was a much larger cotton gin mill. And just as soon as they got it built, then all of these machinery companies like John Deere started bringing stuff in, and you Mennonites with your wheat that you brought from Russia started growing wheat. They quit growing cotton, and the cotton gin just fizzled out. Just completely fizzled out. There was just a bunch of tin buildings. But there was 2 cotton gins for about 6 months until the first one was torn down. And then the second. Railroad track, we just went over the railroad track. And one of the things that we used to do when the cars were parked here was crawl through between the 2 box cars. And there was also wooden pallets that they used to put at the door of the box car to hold stuff in, and they stacked them. And they'd stack them so there was a hole in the middle. Us kids used to hide in them, and then when the passenger train would come by, we'd pop up out of those boxes so that we could see if we could scare somebody on the train. Now, Arthur Stillwell has no monument anywhere in the United States that I can find for all the work he did. Some 10 at least, 10 railroad systems he built in the Kansas City, Missouri area, in addition to the Kansas City, Southern Illinois stop. With the coming of the railroad, the city hotel was built, and J.J. Crowley sold his farm and bought this hotel, and he renamed it the Hotel Stillwell. And it was a 2-story hotel that was located where the vacant lot is. Raymond Woods bought this property, and we have a picture of it at the museum where they had raised the hotel up on blocks, and Davy Martins and his crew was getting ready to move the hotel off. Now, on the left, the green building there, the corner bar, in case you all don't know, it's a place where beer is sold. It's the only place in town that sells beer that I know of, and I've heard rumors of others, but be that as it may, Fairview never had a saloon. They never had a saloon because the council got together and they gerrymandered the districts of the town so that all teetotalers were on the board. And every time somebody come up and want to build a saloon, they turned it down. We're going to get to another story about brothels. Brothels. I looked it up on Google. It's some kind of a place where girls are kept for the pleasure of men. We never had one like that in Fairview, but there is a rumor that there is one. This building right here was built by Dr. Lindley. Now this block, and here we are, 1903, 1907, 1908. The only buildings that were there, the far left was a wooden 2-story building owned by Wellington Brown, and that was the post office that replaced the post office the Bauer brothers installed when they first made the trip to Fairview. And on the right-hand side, at about where the Royal Theater, Lot 8 of this Block 70, there was a little bank building. And Mr. Willis from Rusk, where he had a bank, closed that bank down and moved that building to Fairview. I have trouble with this because Fairview State Bank was 5 banks, and I get confused about which one came first. But I think basically the Citizens Bank and this Bank of Fairview started, and then there was the First State Bank, which was down on the corner on the right, and then there was the Carroll Bank. Now, we got to get back to the railroad. W.C. Edwards. Edwards was the former Secretary of State of the state of Kansas, became the postmaster for Wichita, Kansas, was intrigued by Stilwell's promise of growth and prosperity in the Cherokee outback. So he got on that committee that formed this town. W.C. Edwards packed his bag and came down here, and he bought the land north of the town he had plotted and east of the town he had plotted, which was all of a half section of land, now where your school system is and everything, that the Cornelsons owned. Edwards owned all of that around there. He was going to enclose. We had three companies come to Fairview that were builders: Kersey, Goodwin, and Keck. George Keck. Kersey and Goodwin started building, and Edwards bought lots on this side, and he put that area together. He also bought lots on this side. Because he was postmaster, everything of title is in the name of Francis Edwards, his wife. He put everything in his wife's name. But the reason I wanted to stop here and go through this, everybody wants to know about the bird on the roof or the H on the roof on this side.
What about the eagle up here?
That eagle, that's what I'm talking about, that bird. W.C. Edwards then proceeded to get with Mr. Preston and Mr. Moore, and they built this building over here. That's not one building, those are separate buildings, just off that. And he put a common front on it he called a Union Block. Being a postmaster, he had some clout. He got the post office moved down here where it says the loft became the next post office. Wellington Brown went out of business and sold his to the Deluxe Cafe. In 1920, Francis then made a contract with the U.S. government to move the post office from that building over to this lot here, which actually the Sutter family had a feed store in the north half of Francis Edwards building, and the post office was in the south half, except for the front 12 feet wide by 25 foot deep was the cigar stand. And you may remember that post office, some of you. So the post office was over here, and the contract was a 10-year contract, renewed until 1950. And then our post office moved when they built a new building over east. And I don't remember anybody that did that, but they did that, and the post office left here. But on Main Street, we had a post office in 3 places.
When did they move the marquee from the movie?
Huh?
When did they take the marquee down from the movie? That's not relevant, but I was just wondering. That was a really neat.
This lot right here, where the yellow brick is, was known as the Elk Head Pharmacy. And it was the only building on this side, with the exception of a little bank building, that Mr. Willis moved from us. That was the Lindley family. Then he bought that lot over there and built that building, and they moved over there, and he had a porch on the 2nd floor where Mrs. Lindley could sit on the porch and watch the people in their buggies go up and down this street. There were no horses. This was vacant here. The H building was where Dr. Bond came to later, and that's Jack Hargrove built that building and put the H on it for his name. Jack was in the American Legion. The American Legion started right here in this building on the end. And of course you notice the second floor of these buildings was all in keeping with the demands of the railroad for housing for their men. And so there were apartments and there were a lot of people that lived up there. Also, we had 5 doctors in Fairview at that time. And I'll get to that later. So, we have Edwards here and Edwards here. Then we have Edwards down there in the next block and land all around. Now, he got the farm in his name, but all the town lots were in the wife's name. So, that explains the Eagle. And of course, in time then, the bank merged and became Fairview State Bank. Connie mentioned about the sign. I don't know when they replaced that sign, but it became the Royal Theater clear back in 1922.
Well, it probably was put up there then, but
I don't know. I don't have
The
anything.
Abernathy's were there forever. But I thought the marquee was so pretty when it came out.
Was there a sign on it? I remember the marquee,
Yeah, but it had all the movies on it.
but I don't know whether that sign was the sign. See, I didn't know whether it was a catch question or not. Okay. In 1907 and 8, this building here then was built to start filling in this block. So remember, we only had a couple of little places here and one down on the end. And over here we had one on the end. And next to that then was J.J. Neufeld and John Klassen put in a merchandise store. And that was all there was until there was a little barber shop about 8 by 8 right here where this where Willett's place is. And it just a little shed set by itself. And then they built the Elk Head Pharmacy and moved over there. Cox came to town and he put in a drugstore right in here someplace, a wooden structure. So we had 2 drugstores right there close together. But this building here was started first. It was the first brick building that was started on Main Street. This one right here. That became Foster's. Before that it was Chick Fritch. Before that it was, I forgot. Murray built this one where Barkett's was. All right, we can go left on Broadway now. Of course, right here was Dr. Johnson's office where Max is. Right in there. And in this block here on the left, George Keck put in a building there, and that was George Keck Construction Company. And on the corner, the lot on the corner, now stop. The lot on the corner, everything else was vacant. There was a 12 by 12 building, and that was the fire department. We had a wagon with a tank on it that hauled water, and that was the fire department. The horses that pulled the wagon were south of where the American Legion building is and the livery stable. So if there was a fire, then they had to get the horses to come up and hook to the wagon and go to the fire. Now on my right at the far end is the first building that was on this block. This is the D.R. Thomas Hardware Building, the 2-story building that later became the Cornelson Building. This was the Opera House on the 2nd floor. The first building that Thomas built was a wooden building. Thomas put in the hardware store at the bottom, and then he had an Opera House on the 2nd floor, which he called the Thomas Hall. It was the only building in town big enough to house any community events. the Christian church had their first church service in the Thomas Hall Opera House. Our first graduation class in the high school, 1910, 6 students had their graduation in the Opera House. It was a couple of years before we had our first opera. Mrs. Thomas was an opera buff, but the first show was the Troubadours, I think it's the word I want. Troubadours came and did a show. It's called some kind of a passion play. But there was a fire. Wellington Brown's 2-story wooden building caught on fire. Everybody was at the Opera House. It burned, and it burned the building next door. Well, Thomas realized then he didn't have any fire escape in that building. So he had to get busy, and he put up rope ladders and wooden ladders on the east side so you could crawl out the window to get out in case of a fire. He also replaced the wooden posts that held up along the side with metal posts, and the stage became like corrugated tin, and that was the stage because he didn't want anything that would burn. But because of his interest in fire prevention, they named him the fire chief. He became the fire chief. Now, a chemical company came to Fairview and said, "Is this all you've got?" He had a chemical truck, and he said, "I want you to buy my chemical system, and you can get out and put out fires like this." So they decided they would consider it. So they said, "Well, let's have a mock fire, and you can bring your chemical truck, and let's see if you can put out that fire." Some kids found out about it. So the night that they were going to have the fire, these kids piled a bunch of rubbish over here by the railroad tracks, and when the sound started, the bell clanged, and they headed for this fire, another fire broke out. Thomas was out in front of the wagon leading the way south on Main Street, and there was no paving or anything, fell down in the mud, and the wagon ran right over him. And so he remembered for that from then on, and he was no longer the fire chief. But Thomas was a very involved man with our community events. Now in 1903, after the railroad came into town and the passengers, and we had a big celebration at the Floyd Hotel, the city men said, "Let's get our government started." So they formed the city commissioners. They didn't have any money, but they went back to that little wooden bank building, and they held a meeting in that bank building. And they decided on 3 different things. One of them was to get a town marshal, and one of them was to bury the dead carcasses laying around, and I forget the third thing. But anyhow, they said, "Let us meet over here." Now, during these years, we also had a city band, and the band would meet up there. The first order of business the city council had was, "We want the band to shut up while we're having city council meetings. We can't hear each other." So they used that building frequently for everything. But then we did, in '07, we didn't have a courthouse, so the county rented the Opera House as the courthouse. So it was a combination city hall and courthouse. Now, W.C. Edwards built that building, and J.L. Admire became the postmaster. J.L. had come down here from Kingfisher. J.L. went to the council and said, "I'll buy a couple of these cheap lots over here if you want to build a city hall." So they agreed to pursue that. Then the offer came up over on this block, and we can pull forward now. Thomas owned this lot, and Niles Godfrey had the real estate office here. Later that became the Republican, then this became the Republican. The Republican moved all over town. Now stop. The vacant lot's here where the sign is. And then there was a vacant lot on the next side that the investor from up in some place in Kansas and bought, came to the city council meeting and said, I will give you those 2 lots if when you build your city hall, you'll allow me to have a common wall. When I build my building, then we'll have a building beside the city hall with a common wall. And they agreed to it. So they went ahead with plans to build a city hall. And so they did build the city hall. They didn't have a room for the courthouse. So court was held in the Opera House. And the stage was where the judge sat. And they held court over there until 1928 when the courthouse was built down at the end of the street. The only problem was, in those early years, we were still having money, getting our tax money from Alva, because they didn't want us to become a county, and they certainly didn't want Fairview to be a county seat. So we had a problem with county revenue. What difference does it make? The county wasn't paying the city their bill for renting the space in the city hall. They were not taking care of their cesspool. They were not keeping their cesspool clean. The county was one of the worst tenants that the city had, as because there was just no money. Okay, I think that about covers it. We can go forward now.
Well, when did they start putting bricks on the buildings downtown?
Or the what?
When did they start putting bricks on the buildings?
1908.
That was right after, right
They started
before
those buildings all in 1908. There were 33 construction jobs at one time in the early 1909.
Oh, keep going.
The
One
other
of the
guy-
things, stop right here. One of the things that we encountered right after statehood, the Mennonite churches got together and formed a committee, of which M.M. Just was the chairperson. And they came to the city council and they said, we have $1,000. We want you to match that $1,000 to go against building a hospital. The hospital would have cost around $8,000. And because of that, they could not get the revenue that they needed to go through the process of starting with the $1,000. And of course, they had to pay out the rest with bond issues and all of that. But the point is, a hospital was requested in 1907. It was a very serious endeavor. And those churches all put some of their money up front in the effort to get a hospital started. Now, at that time, we had 5 doctors in Fairview. And I go back to Dr. Lindley as an example of the 5. If he was a doctor, he had to make all of his drugs. So he had a drugstore, and he mixed this stuff with this little pedestal and stuff. In the back, he had a little recovery room. So if you came in and you were sick, you go in the recovery room. Now, and he had a market built into his medical practice, don't you see? So here they're saying, we want a hospital. The doctor said, we got it all covered. You don't have to have a structure called a hospital. And so it went on for a number of years that way, until in 1947, and some of those old guys are dead and gone and forgotten about. Robert Ryan came to Fairview, and he put in a hospital right there on that vacant lot, a 2-story frame rectangular building with a reception room on the south side and the emergency room in the back. I know where the emergency room was because I fell out of the back of a pickup in 1946 and they brought me to that emergency room. I've got scar tissue here where I landed, and Ryan stood there and picked all this dirt out of my face, and he said, you'll never run again. 2 weeks later I was in the races in Stillwater. But in any event, I remember that hospital. I wasn't aware about the history of it until just this past week. But the building was more of an oversized recovery room or clinic. there wasn't an operating room as such that I recall, and the facilities that we think of in a hospital today, like our x-ray room and different things like that. It was basically a number of hospital rooms to go into for recovery. So,
I think they had babies there.
1949, yes, they had babies there. They had babies everywhere. Yeah.
But that was a hospital.
But as far as having a surgery room or x-rays, they didn't have anything like that. It was just your typical medical care. 1949, I think it was,
Smith.
well, in that era, right after Ryan maintained it, Donald Smith, MD, son of Malcolm and Elizabeth Smith Drugstore, came back to Fairview. And he bought the hospital. And then Dr. Bond came to Fairview and came in with Dr. Smith. And they maintained that hospital for a number of years. And I think it was in the 50s that Smith died and Bond went downtown to where the H on the roof is. That's where he went. So we had still a number of doctors, but no hospital as such after that. It became an apartment house. Dr. Belter and Dr. K, we can go forward the next block and turn right. Put in the Belter K Clinic. And I've got to bring that into the story because they put the picture in the newspaper. But that's where it was. Originally it was the Presbyterian Church. The Presbyterian Church had a basement. First and second grades of the Fairview School went in the basement to school. But this foundation that you see on that vacant lot right there was the Belter K Clinic. And it was basically just a facility for a doctor's office, examinations, and recovery room like the old timers. But it was bigger and more sophisticated. Originally the Presbyterian Church. Now, the vacant lot to the south was the big first school building. Started in 1906, before statehood, because you got all these people coming to town that are going to get rich, and they're bringing kids, and the school system was growing faster than we could maintain. They started that building in 06, and when they started school, they still had grades going to 601 6th Street. They had kids going to this building, and then the high school age kids, some of them were going to the Opera House to school. And there was a skating rink we'll see about on South Main. The rest of the high school students went to that skating rink. They had them farmed out all over town until they could get this building built, which was a sophisticated state-of-the-art building, built half in 06-07 and the other half in 07-08, at which time they brought all of the classes together. Sophisticated in that they had multiple outhouses strung across 9th Street over there. It's just that in the wintertime you had to walk a half a block from the schoolhouse to the outhouse, and that was an inconvenience. There was a cistern for water, which was not potable water, but they had, along with the city of Fairview, facilities for buying potable water from Rusk, Oklahoma. So in 1908 then, fully occupied, and no sooner than that was done till they saw they were going to have to expand, and this building here was started. Completed in 1937. In 1936, Presbyterian Church here, Joe Halk and I went to our first years in the basement of the Presbyterian Church. First grade and second grade went in that building there. Third grade went in that room there. When they got the other side of the building done, first and second grade went to that far end down there. And now we can go to it.
When did that belong?
I had no idea.
Oh, that's important.
Turn right and go. The railroad union wrote a letter to the city council and said, you are not making enough rooms in this town for our railroaders. we need more room. The council contacted Kersey and Goodwin and Keck and said, what do you guys think? They got with other people who wanted to invest money, and it was agreed that 10 houses would be built for railroaders. So starting with the blue house is the end of the 10 houses in here. 1 or 2 of them have been replaced with newer houses, but 10 little bungalows were built right here for the railroad families. The Hootens lived in the blue house. Remember? Yeah. Okay. Now we can go forward. I gotta get that in. And when we get to Legion, we gotta stop again. Now, if you all are getting tired of this, we can shut it down anytime.
I'm getting hungry.
You didn't just, the guy you was talking about was my great grandpa. You didn't just, my great grandpa.
He was chairman of the group. He was the speaker.
Yeah.
And he was a speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a member. Okay, right here. The livery stable was down there where that house was. Pete Jones had the veterinary service in a little building right here.
Yeah.
This was a residence here till 1920, and they built the Legion building. If you can look over at this building over here, see the back of that architecture? Whoa. Did you see it?
Which building?
Which one?
Ben Baker?
Mr. Hebert bought that from Cornelius Gertz, the blacksmith on the corner, and built the Lyric Theater. So we had a Lyric Theater, and then we had the Odeon Theater, and Roddy Reams used to marvel at going in there where the ceiling had been lowered. I think Russell remodeled that building when he bought it, Russell Reams. But he said he could tell that it was built with a slope to it for a movie seating and the screen. And this vacant lot right here was the Midway Hotel in response to the demand by the railroad. This man went to Rusk and bought the old Midway Hotel and moved it over here and set it up for board and room, so that they had board and room there, and then there's one north of what was the Fairview Lumber Company. 2 board and room buildings. But the Midway was right there in the Lyric Theater. And the Lyric Theater was the one, the first show they had black people in it. And the Lyrics would not let them show the show, as they said that no black people could be in town. So that started the little thing about the black people. It was used for several civic events, but not too many movie shows. Okay, going on west of Main Street, you must remember in 1900, 1989, along in there, this was not downtown. Downtown was on your left. There was no street as such. It was virtually just a mud hole where the buggies had gone back and forth. There on the corner was a few buildings. Down to the Jensens where Todd and Susan's place is was several business buildings. Dr. Smith and Hubble Hotel and Bates Racket Store. And then right where the back pickup is to the west was the original house of Fairview, a log cabin that Adam and Clifford Bowers built. And it sat there for several years until I've never figured out why or what caused John Floyd to move up to the other end of the block. But it drew the development that way, and this block fizzled out. And so Bowers then sold out this cabin and post office and got a different place. Dick Cornelson bought that log cabin, and there is a picture in the Fairview paper when Dick Cornelson then remodeled it he covered it on the outside and everything, and you would have never known it was a log cabin. But when they tore it down, they found the log cabin, they took the picture, and Art Bowers had a picture put in the paper of it when Dick built his new house. But it was the original structure in Fairview right there. Now, going back to our old railroads, Arthur Stillwell finally got enough money from salary. He bought these lots right here, back of this building here, and put in Anthony Wholesale Company. Anthony, Kansas had a wholesale grocer company, and he just bought them out and moved it all down here. Green Parrot Foods. Wes, isn't that right? Green Parrot? You hold up your finger. What do you got there?
Dog.
This building here, a Stewart Oil Company, was the Anthony Wholesale Company. Now, on the left, Mike Howard came to Fairview, and he put in a little poultry house. And it was just a small thing, but for some reason, he started with poultry, and then he developed cream, and then he built his creamery. So, he expanded it over the years. That whole structure that Leland and Mary Jane bought was utilized as the Howland Poultry Creamery. Their office was the office of Howland. The room to the west was the creamery. And there was a big basement, wasn't there, Leland? And there was conveyor belts, and chickens would come in and they would kill them and dress them down there on those conveyor belts, pack them, and then this was storage over in this part of the building. And he got into the turkey industry, and that grew, and many of you remember about the turkeys, and we still give turkeys at the fly-in. But we got famous for our turkeys, and in 1958 or so, WKY came up, this is Butch Eddingfield's story, that they had the show where they talked to the various people, and it was on, and you can get it on Google now if you want to. You can pull it up, or Facebook or something. Anyhow, they called it the turkey capital of the country, and we have stories of Howland products in Korea in the 50s, and they went through that process of going through the government for contracts, and then, of course, they sold out, and it became Pratt Furniture for a number of years. Okay, so we go on to the west, but now we've gone as far as I want to go, except to go to the first street and turn right. 1902, in preparation for the railroad opening here, the man that put the hotel in down there by Jensen's, Mr. Hubble, sold it, and it became the Orient Hotel. So the Orient Hotel was brought right here and laid right there where that flower box is to the north, the parking lot. And then Willis, who had the little bank on the corner, went back over to Rusk and bought more buildings and brought them over and put in a pool hall and a bowling alley between the hotel and the depot that we saw out yonder, set right there where Randy Cleaver's building is. And over here was two cafes. There was two little cafes over here. There was a bakery, and this was all designed to catch people on the train and feed them. World War II, the passenger train used to come through here from Altus, and we kids used to go over to White Rock Cafe and buy hamburgers for a dime and come over and sell them for a quarter. But there was two restaurants here, and then the Smiths bought into a creamery that was over on Main Street and developed Smith Creamery, which expanded from this first building to go all the way down to include where the post office is. At one time, Walter Weiss had a feed store there, but this was all Smith Creamery. I've got pictures that Sue Graham gave me that her dad had in the insurance agency when they had that storm that damaged the gym that her folks helped tear up over at the high school building. And it shows this building being torn down by the storm. So it was a pretty bad cyclone that pretty well messed all that building up. Going to Main Street through right.
You want to go by the...
Yo, do we need to stop?
Yeah.
Do we need a pit stop?
Yep.
Okay, let's go to here. And then we can come back here. Back in those years when there was no cash flow, we had a number of
You
people
want to go left or right?
left
Okay.
from the German community that were maintaining the beer still. Right here, we want to stop.
Smith's Drug.
You all know about the
whoa. Let's all go in here.
Royal
They're getting
Theater.
excited now.
The Royal Theater was originally the Odeon
Picture of
Theater,
this.
and
Church
the
bus with
Abernathy's
the-
maintained the Odeon and then the Royal, and had two generations, so there was a lot of notoriety. There's never anything said about the air dome. Fairview had an air dome. An air dome is, by definition, an enclosure of some kind, usually a flexible roof structure. Fairview's air dome was the sky. This lot right here was a vacant lot that was bought when movie films first came out. The first movie was shown where? In the Opera House. The next movies were at the Odeon. They started showing movies down here and they called it the Air Dome. And I could not find anything that defined what the Air Dome was until I ran across an article in the Fairview Republican under the local news in 1909 that the Air Dome burned up. And it was that there was a dirty rag and he was smoking a cigarette and caught that rag on fire and started the fire. 1,500 foot of film burned, and the sparks went over to Parks Jewelry onto the roof. Henry Bauer owned all of that, where the Robinson's barbershop is, and that was Parks Jewelry, and the fire caught over there. And so that was the end of the Air Dome, and I guess that's why we don't hear any more about it. It just had a short life. But there was the Lyric Theater, and this Air Dome, and the Royal Theater. Of course, Don Abernathy bought a lot on the east side of Maine, north of where the Republican is, planning on putting one in. Dr. Smith, M.M. Smith, had his, quote, doctor's office and drugstore here. He bought that lot to expand. I measured so I could get the 25 foot where the Air Dome was, and this woman came out. And she said she found, when she was remodeling back here, there's a room back there that was a brothel. It was not a brothel. Dr. Smith had a recovery room, just like all your other clinics. If somebody was sick, that little room was where the patient would go to lay on the bed for a reason or another. But she says, and she will maintain, and you will hear it coming probably as a rumor, that Fairview had a brothel. It was not a brothel.
Everybody knew everybody.
The two-story building is Bates, and Bates put in the two-story building, and he called it the racket shop. He had a racket shop down where Jensen's was, but it was a wooden building, and he built this two-story building. This building became Bates Drugstore, and was a drugstore for many, many years. And the counter of it is now over in the American Legion building, I think. Now, the Bowers boys, they pretty well dominated this. This was their quarter section of land. So this block was their development there. Henry put in those 3 lots there and had the toggery. Clifford and his brother Adam put in a store here where it's vacant now. Clifford also went in with Haley, and right here was Haley Brothers. And so they had this side of the street. Over here was vacant except for a little barber shop. The 2 red brick buildings were built at the same time. Parr Brothers put in the 2-story red brick further building where the fitness center was, and it was either a Ratzlaff or a Salaska built the next building, and the Goldbergs came down from Kansas City and put in a dry goods store there. Tompkins then put in a little wooden building and put in Tompkins Cafe. Cleaver put in a shop here. It became a harness shop. Later it became Wells Leather Goods, and there was also a little blacksmith shop in here. Meanwhile, Floyd had all of this over here as Floyd's Grocery and Floyd Hotel. Okay, we need to run down then, going on south where Benton Baker's was, and this side was the Cornelia.
Somewhere over here. Idson, Weeds, Mortuary, and...
No.
Where was that at?
No, that's next door.
Because
No,
Wes
that's the
has
furthest
pictures, and I didn't know. It's not my family, I don't think.
No,
But it's Wes's family.
Peter Waynes.
Yeah, but it's a different people, not his.
But he had a farm, and he had that law and the undertaker business, and this was Crest put this Citizens Bank in straight ahead. Citizens Bank in, and then later it became McDonald's, and then right north of that was Stranahan Louder, and it became Weedles. Gertz was the only thing here, and this was pretty well developed, but they moved all these wooden buildings off and utilized them for other buildings. So we're done now on the next block. Red brick building on the right, the home. George Keck built that. And the next door south was the Osborne Garage. And the last space on the right, this Steckel built a skating rink. Built it right here.
I guess you're better doing that.
And it was later used as a church. It was a Pentecostal Holiness Church. George lived there. My dad had that service station right there. The pumps was all kind of like this, so he let me go out there and pump. And we would sit out here waiting for people to come. George came over, and they're having a service. And they were speaking in tongues. We could remember that. George went and got his horn. Comes back, and he's sitting out there on the curb blowing his horn during church service. Now that's kids. That's the way on our kids. Anyhow, George Keck finally bought it and converted it to a shop for his equipment. But it was used not only as a skating rink, but there were 2 classes of school that attended school over here as well when the big brick building was being built. This lot here on the other side of the street is where the Blue Front Hotel was, that we don't know how it could get there. Then the city, when electricity came, and it was between 8 and 12 that they were scurrying around, they got water first. Sewage was really the big problem. I mentioned about burying the carcasses. They had trouble with cesspools. So sewage was a big problem. Potable water was a big problem. Electricity was slow in coming. But they finally appropriated money at the same time they bought an interest in the Hog Ranch, which is Williams Scout Ranch, over southeast of Clio, for a water supply to bring water over. They had a water well dug in the middle of the street down here and a trough for the horses. But by 1909 and 1910, when automobiles started coming to town, the city passed a law. They set speed limits on the cars, and every car had to have a muffler on it. And the cars were still scaring the horses, so all horses had to be parked here on Central or up north where the corner of the bar was on that street. They couldn't be parked here because there was too much commotion. Also, the merchants were starting to put little stands out on the street to sell food. And the city council put a ban on selling food on the sidewalk which had just been built. And that made the sidewalks open. Kids started roller skating on the sidewalks, so they passed a law then, no horses on Main Street, no cars without mufflers, no kids on with their skates, and so they started spinning tops. So they passed a law, no spinning of tops. They had a meeting, they didn't have anything else to talk about, and somebody said, that dog over there on the east side of town has got to go. They checked it out. The marshal had a dog that was declared a public nuisance. So he got fined for having a dog that was a public nuisance. The city council had a lot to do. But anyhow, the electricity that they wanted to generate was generated by a plant which was built a half a mile east of Fairview. But in time, and there's a man by the name of Deemer that came and helped build this electric plant down here, which is the original plant, but with new engines. Now, if we go forward down,
When was that built?
28, I think, 27. It's written on the front of the building. It's in the 20s. Because to me, it's a new building. And I'll get to the point of it.
Jim's old too. I don't see it. Oh, there's a sign. Can you read it?
Can't read it.
1945.
Yeah. 1945.
Well, it was built before
I
that.
think that one says 1945, but this is older than that.
Yeah, it was built before that. Well, and the reason I wanted to make reference to it, and we'll come back to that point as we go forward, go on down. As we get on the south side of the El Maya Mexican restaurant, you'll see a creek area to the west. That is the hobo village. The hobos would come in on the railroad and they had an encampment in there. They were very well organized. They had a newsletter right here. They knew what town was favorable and what wasn't. So there were right down through that. Yeah, there you go. Down through that creek, there were places dug out of the embankment where they would make a little nest place, to sleep. But in the wintertime, and it got cold, they would go up to the electric plant because it was warm up there. So the city council had to make the marshal make a special route every night to go over and chase the hobos out of the electric plant. And so the hobos maintained this area in here. They used to come by our house. I can remember them as a kid. They were polite. They would cut weeds out of Mama's flower bed for something to eat. And that's the way they lived.
We lived on 6th Street. Mother was always making sandwiches.
And the city council said, I know what we'll do. We'll make an ordinance. So they made an ordinance. Anybody that wasn't employed had to cut wood. And they formed a committee, and the committee set the price of the wood for these people to cut, which is intended to catch the hobos and make them go to work. Well, they just all got on the train and left and didn't cut any wood at all. So they didn't have any problem figuring out what to do. But anyhow, that was Hobo Village. Right here in the parking lot was the flour mill, which was the first real structure built in Fairview. I do not know why the emphasis was on a flour mill at that point in time, because broom corn and cotton was still strong. But the foresight that those people had was magnanimous because it drew the wheat growers into operation. And we had a big flour operation. 3 stories tall. There was a corn grinder, a cleaner. There was a wheat cleaner. There was, I've got it written down in my notebook. There was several different types of machinery for different grains, but they milled flour as the ultimate product. And Fairview flour was well liked by everybody. The only problem they had was their cesspool, set right over in there from where that building is, over towards the creek. First thing they did was start draining the creek. Well, the hobos didn't like that. They dammed it up. But the stench from the corn that they had been working with in the mill was causing the problem. So they built a hog pen, and they thought they could clear it with a hog pen. So we had a hog farm right here for a number of years until we could get some kind of a sewer system to cover the cesspools. The cesspools were just virtually an open pit with an outhouse in it. Okay, so we go on, and on the left then, from this point on, off to the low areas, forgetting the high areas, was the Orient Lake, which was nothing more than a shallow pond with a track from the railroad tracks that came through here to the pond where the engines could get water to go over to the shops. And it has a very exotic memory to it. Somebody took a picture of it and put it on postcards, and there's postcards all over it. Orient Lake. But it wasn't very big. It was man-made. After the railroad left in the 20s, in 1920, the city council said, we want rid of that lake. The boys that lived over here, Russell Lovely, the sheriff, his boy, there's several boys that go, they skinny dip in the Orient Lake. People would come out and picnic in the evening, and those kids would be skinny dipping. And so there's liability, and the city said to the railroad, we want you to get rid of the lake. So in 1922, they drained the lake, and then they I don't know whether they did it or the city, but there was a time lapse before Santa Fe Railroad, which would be 1928 at least. They sold that tract of land back to the city for $5,800. All your area on back in the back was your railroad shops. We had a number of shops. Arthur Stillwell wanted to make Fairview the division point of the Orient Railroad with all of his maintenance shops here. It took 150 men to operate those shops and the roundhouse. We had 150 men who were single or families in Kansas or someplace else living in Fairview. And that's why all of these apartments, why these boarding houses, these second floors, hotels and everything were so vital to Fairview's history. Because there's 150 guys. In March of 1910, a spark started in one of the buildings, started a fire, and our fire department loaded up their horses and headed down here, and by the time they got here, it was burned to the ground. So 1910 was the turning point of all of our development in Fairview in preparation for the coming of the railroad, which W.C. Edwards said would reach 10,000 population. If 10,000 ever got reached, I don't know when it was. It never did. Because Wichita blasted it and got on the Kansas City Star in Kansas City, Missouri, and said, Fairview doesn't have a fire department. Wichita's got a fire department. Put your division plants there. And they had the space. There were other railroads going east and west anyhow through Wichita. Wichita beat us out. Everything was on. All we had was going forward.
Where was the round top? Where was the round top?
The round house is what we're coming to.
Jim, all the buses are back.
Huh?
All the buses are back.
The hospital.
So just FYI, I don't want you to exclude, I want you to be aware. I got a text.
All right. Right in through there was the roundhouse. The main railroad came up beside the elevator, and then the tracks went over there. They had a big turntable with 10 stalls at the roundhouse. The engine would come in on the turntable, it would turn, and the engine would go in. They worked on engines for other railroad companies, not only the Orient, but it was torn down left, down the street, down. Well, those other guys, they ran out of steam, didn't they?
Yeah. You're just getting warmed up.
That was a really bad thing to tear down the roundhouse. There were only
Oh, yeah. Together and organized to have a county fair. There was no money. They sold stock. People bought shares of stock in the Fair Association to have a county fair. One of the main features of the county fair was horse racing, where your rodeo ground was the stables. There was a half-a-mile track laid east-west out through here. And after World War II, a stadium was built right here, and on the other side of the track was a tower for the announcer. Now, I've been told, but I didn't know it because I didn't live here in the 50s, but in the 50s they converted and used that track for auto races. That Wayman had an auto car, George Keck had one, a number of people, and even some people that went to Indianapolis were known to have raced here. Garen Martin's made a study of that. But the half-mile track was a horse track, and the newspaper talked about the races and said hardly anything about the county fair. The next year, the city council gave them $500, and they formed the Fair Association. Now, after World War II, we formed a race horse association. Until that time, there were just local people raced their horses. They also had pacers and trotters. But after World War II, it went strictly to a race, a running horse, and there was a circuit in northwest Oklahoma. Woodward, Visay, Arnett, Tologa, Fairview, and we participated in horse races there. Going on now, and we have an end to our story as we go back for refreshments.
Okay.
All of this to the fair board for just a few dollars, and our fair has maintained it real good. We have cut out the racetrack. Our high school, we used to run on that track because we didn't have a track at the school. And then we put our football field out there. I trained on that track and ran. We had track meets. We ran a half mile, then we'd go to Edmond, places like that that only had a quarter-mile track. We didn't know what to do. We just took off. And looked out across here and said, "That's a Fairview." That's the story we have. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But Adam Bauer, where the little log cabin was there on West Central, is the one that filed the name with the U.S. Postal Service, and Clifford became the postmaster.
DeSoto came over the mountains and he